Hello everyone, Matsuri here. Today's subject is quite important in my opinion because it's an almost universal furry experience that we are doing something related to the furry fandom and we end up having to explain the fandom to someone who isn't as familiar with what it is, which can be quite an awkward experience because the furry fandom is quite stigmatized, I think more so than a lot of other fandoms like anime or science fiction. And I wanted to talk about it because I've personally had a lot of experiences where I've had to explain the fandom and my involvement in it to people outside the fandom. I volunteer for a mascot group, and I've learned about the way we talk about costuming and furries and everything in that group. And I've talked to people at school, I've talked to my family, I've talked to a variety of people, and this video is going over what I've learned from my experiences, and hopefully knowing how to explain the furry fandom to people in a positive way will help us move toward the point where eventually the fandom can be much less stigmatized and it can be much easier and less awkward to explain it to people, maybe sometime in the future. So jumping from the point about stigma, I'm going to go right into my first point about explaining the furry fandom to people outside the fandom, which is if you explain it to them like it's a bad thing, that's how they're going to take it. But if you explain it to them positively, and don't act super awkward like it's something you have to hide, then that's going to increase the chances that the people you're talking to are going to get that impression about the fandom and in turn perhaps be more accepting of it. And maybe they'll start to think, maybe those whatever bad things they may have heard about the furry fandom aren't true after all. Now I know maybe it's a little bit easier for me to say that just because I'm not involved in the mature side of the fandom at all. So in your case, it may be a little bit different. But overall, I think a big step towards explaining the furry fandom to people in a way that will get them to listen and suspend their apprehensions is being more open about it. And when people are interested, explaining it to them in a way that is positive and shows them how cool the furry fandom actually is. Not like it's something over in the corner of the closet over there that we shouldn't be talking about. It's actually really cool, and if you can convey that to them, then maybe that will help. Now yes, some people will have very strong preconceptions about the furry fandom, and even if you're really positive about it, they might think, this is super weird, maybe I shouldn't be associating with this. Or maybe sometimes you're not going to have the time to explain to someone. Maybe they're just passing by and they're not going to stand there and listen to you for a long time about how the furry fandom isn't really this, it's really that. And so that brings me into my next point, which is, do you even need to use the word furry when explaining the fandom to people? For example, when I volunteer for the mascot group, usually people are just passing by when we're at an event, which we'll be doing some promotion or entertainment for the kids or whatever, and they'll just be like, what's this? These are cute animals. What are you doing here? And typically they'll just stop for a couple of seconds, maybe take a business card, and then leave. So we don't even use the word furry because we're only interacting with these people for a couple of seconds, maybe a minute. They're not going to have time to listen to our explanation about, oh, the furry fandom is this, and this is what we're doing. So if you're trying to explain the furry fandom to someone who's not in the fandom, think about maybe you can explain it in other terms. Like in this case, we just say we're a nonprofit mascot group or charity or something along those lines. And what language you're using when you're explaining the fandom to people is really important too, even in cases where they're not super apprehensive about the furry fandom. For example, if you refer to fursuits to someone outside the fandom, they might not know what you're talking about. So if you're explaining the costumes, you might start from a more understandable point, such as mascot-style costumes or mascots, and then ease into the idea of fursuits and what terms the furry fandom has for these things if it's necessary. Okay, so far we have try to be positive. Do you even need to use the term furry, and in general, thinking about the terms you're using when you're describing this to somebody who has no idea what's going on. The third question is more details about who are you talking to? Do you know the person and what might they value in the furry fandom? If you know the person is interested in something in particular that happens in the fandom, maybe you can use that as a jumping off point to explain everything the fandom does. For example, I'm at an art college, and I involve my fursuit in videos, or I show people pictures sometimes. So when people outside have just walked up to me and said, "Hey, this is cool, what are you doing?" And I kind of explained to them in the terms of the artistry of the costumes, and how people draw anthropomorphic art and make stories and craft the costumes. And because I'm at an art college, and the people at the college value those things, I can use it as a way to portray the furry fandom in a positive light and get them to see that this is a cool thing. It's a very rich fandom. I mean, the fandom has visual art, writing, music, dancing. No matter who the person you're talking to, I'm sure you can find something in the fandom that connects to what they like and use it to help explain what the fandom does. Here's something I found out when I did a project based on fursuit dancers from one of my classes. Many people don't realize how much money the furry fandom raises for charity, and you can use this as another way to portray the furry fandom positively. After my project, I was kind of explaining the furry fandom to people, and I got curious about the statistics, so I did some research. I looked up Antho New England, which is the furry fandom I've been to most in the area, and how many attendees it had, and how much it raised for charity. And for the sake of comparison, I looked up Anime Boston, just because it's in the same area. And in my research explaining exactly how much the conventions raised for charity, Antho New England had about 1,400 attendees in 2017, and it raised about $15,000 for Massachusetts Best Dog as charity. So that's about, I think it ended up like $10.84 per attendee or something like that, raised for charity. And then I looked up Anime Boston, which in 2017 had about 26,000 attendees and raised something like $25,000 in a charity auction for whatever charity it has that I'm not familiar with. And that ends up being to about $1 per attendee. So you have Antho New England, which is $10 per person, and Anime Boston, which is $1 per person. So per attendee, these furry conventions raise a huge amount for charity, like 10 times more than a well-known anime convention. And yes, I know that there's a lot of factors that can go into this. The demographic for anime and furry conventions is totally different and such. And I'm not saying that furry conventions are better than other conventions, or that there's something that makes furries necessarily like better than other fandoms. My point is, furries are extremely charitable and have a huge impact outside of the immediate fandom. And if you tell this to people and use it as a way to show how great and productive the furry fandom is, maybe they'll understand it a little bit more and be more willing and accepting and realize, hey, this is super cool, because it is. And the furry fandom has impacts outside of the fandom in addition to just charities too. Remember how I said I was volunteering for a mascot organization? We go to events like fun runs and like other like charity events that are going on, and we go and entertain the kids, and the adults love it too often, and we end up just being a positive force at the event. And like it helps the charity even if it's not necessarily at a convention. And there's lots of other ways furries can have impacts outside the direct fandom. And if you let people know that, because they often don't realize at all that the furries are even doing this, then perhaps we can reach a wider understanding of the furry fandom and break some of those preconceptions that this is just a thing, you know, adults do adult things or are attracted to stuffed animals or whatever. I did read a book that said that. So next time you find yourself in a situation where you need to explain the furry fandom to someone who's not in the fandom or who's not familiar with it, and you feel unsure of what to say that's not going to make them feel even more negative about it, assuming they do feel negatively, or that's just not going to give them a wrong idea, try one of these things. When I did that project I was talking about in class about fursuit dancing, I was talking about how these people put so much time in their dance routines, how much these people get out of dancing personally, like they feel like it's a personal growth and it helps them get through tough emotional times, it connects them to a community. And I talked about how fursuit dance competitions bring lots of people to conventions, which in turn raise money for charity. Like if you go and ask people, a lot of them will say their favorite event is the fursuit dance competition. And that is how I structured my project, to explain how cool fursuit dancing is. And the people in the class were super excited about it. So that's just an example of how you might use what I'm talking about, and that's one of the things that inspired me to make this video, in addition to the volunteer mascot work I've done. So I really hope this was helpful. I personally would love to see the furry fandom have a more positive reputation, and I'm hoping that this is one of the ways we can do it. And I really hope you all enjoyed and got a good look into how I think about it. Please let me know what you thought. I know, again, this doesn't apply to the whole fandom because some people are into it for the mature stuff that my brain is just not there. I don't think about it, so I know this doesn't apply to everybody. But that's my personal take on it. So thank you so much for watching. Please let me know what you think, or I would love to hear your experiences of like sharing what happened when you shared about the furry fandom to people, positive or negative. Please write those in the comments below. I would love to read them, and or anything else you thought about the video. Again, thank you so much for watching, and see you later.